Chapter 12. The Host Cometh. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 14. The body makes more effort to tell a lie than compared to telling the truth, because your brain fabricates an entirely different reality, outcome, complete fictions knowing full well that it is false. In the same manner as imagining a story, characters and their backstories, it makes you mentally more active and these minute details can be detected. In addition, depending on the complexity, severity, and the implications of the lie if it were to be found out, bore from fear of one's preservation or others, it can even be seen on the outside. For Commander Decimus, on board his vessel the Pyrrhic Negotiation, he has many secrets he holds along with the many lies made in order to maintain the facade that he is Commander Decimus and not Fleet Admiral Vasquez of the Daijin Federation. Though never had the likes of lies of this magnitude been warranted, much less maintained for the safety of himself and the others under his command. Inside the captain's quarters was an array of souvenirs from the Daijin Wars. To the crew they were trophies. To him, reminders of a dark chapter in his life. For each item had brought the end of Orion loyalists and faithful alike. More blood had been spilled by the sword, rifle, shotgun, and grenade belt laid above his large metallic desk at the far end of the office opposite to the entrance. Silver walls rimmed with yellow lights and a chandelier hanging from the ceiling were the illuminating sources. The lights from his interactive holographic desk did not flare whatsoever. Any light was captured and used for the 3D holographics floating above. For the past 5 hours, Jaal and Decimus had been rehearsing the many options Eidolon could lay suspicion on his one wording. The commander had leaned back on his chair as it tilted on an angle. Jaal had been comfortably integrated into his specialized Teesh command throne. It was capable of moving on itself and provided a multitude of commodities and tools, the likes of which a ship's second in command would be required to oversee with the captain. Everything that the ship did would come to do, and what is doing in the very moment would be relayed, processed, and documented to his internal memory drives that were implanted to his brain upon becoming an adult. For in Teesh society, after their long jihad against machinery, a great union was deemed to benefit both parties. Symbiosis of Teesh and machine. Teesh were invaluable to the Orion Empire, especially those trains, to be part of the galaxy-spanning network that linked to their grand intelligence mainframe, or as they call it, the Caleum Mentis, of which those connected were known as the Mentis Cogitandi Domini, who could calculate, process and resolve thoughts, emotions and queries at speeds deemed transcendent to those not gifted in their talents. However, spending those hours with Jaal had given Decimus one throbbing headache. I had to test my tactical mettle against your kind back in the Daijin Wars, and it sure as hell feels the same way here, remarked the commander, still gripping to the left side of his head, becoming too far distracted with the throbbing pain on his forehead than anything else. Jaal, ever the logical and straightforward type, prepared an administrative drug via a cocktail that could be drank, made from the medical compartment of his throne, which also read the vitals of the commander, increased heart rate, blood pressure and low blood sugar, exhaustion and irritability from ever-increasing stress. But he didn't take such marvels of machinery to see it plastered all over the commander's face. He snatched the vial from Jaal and threw the internals down with haste, already feeling the ache dissipating. The second-in-command allowed him to regain his composure before pitching in advice. His robotic voice has a mechanical buzz to the undertone, the kind of which you'd hear from a short-wave radio. "Commander, may I make suggestion based on a thought experiment, more precisely a principle?" Decimus brought his hand up to give him all clear. "It is apparent we are overthinking these scenarios, even with current context and considerations taken into account. Perhaps we simply stick to Occam's razor and reiterate your original motif." Jaal brought up a datapad from the left armrest of his chair, and with its extendable arm held it in front of Decimus to read. The contents of the pad were simple notes and diagrams, depicting a script of what Eidolon could say and what they might need to respond with. "Let us put ourselves in the shoes of Eidolon then, shall we, Jaal? I have been informed that the fleet that was sent to track down Tiberius has fucked off somewhere else. After sending 3 Garaheen lords on a supposed suicide mission, and upon arriving to the system, I see no ships of theirs, and I may have found a trail leading to Benisfa. So either way, they did the job and are grabbing all the joys of partying abruptly, avoiding the typical protocol, or they're running from their mistake, and Tiberius is alive and somewhere on this world. And I have more credence to believe he is still here, since anything who would have took him down would have no fear to announce it." It was a sound argument. There was much left to be skeptical about with their departure, and the commander did assume the trail left behind from the warp jump would be traceable. The question would be if he was to be intercepted or left to return, or both. Jaal had to reel the trail of thought to the matter at hand. They had to assume they were at the disadvantage when it came to reasoning with the Illuminator. So priorities will be transferred to damage control, where it's better to receive a scolding of incompetence than would be for disregard of authority and, at worst, betrayal of superior orders. "So then, Jaal, what do we have that could tip it in our favour?" The commander leaned back on his seat and kicked up his feet to the rest of his desk. "Previously mentioned, Occam's razor, and a new resident to the ship, who has already got most of the women acting strange by his presence alone, and the mood of the men has dipped below the average morale." Both of them did indeed feel the influence of Garuda too. They tried to keep themselves distracted with the task at hand to avert the effects. It was recommended to him by the butler from Benisfa that typically not paying attention to him was the best way to alleviate the effects of his power. Pretty nuts, isn't it, Jaal? That the power of an Omega, much more the power of Garuda, could be of such profound nature. Both spun slowly around in their chairs contemplating. Eventually Jaal put in his thought, "All the better we had him. He'll provide good leeway to our point. I know that there is a chance we'll be found out based on how well Eidolon can read an individual to see if they're lying. It's a trait that the higher-ups of the faithful all seem to have to some degree. A bit mysterious, if you ask me. It's against logic." Decimus's gaze had wandered out to the passing stars outside the ship, continued on its trajectory. All could have worlds that may harbour life or civilizations yet uncontacted, and in his mind it was for the best given his experience with encountering others outside his own system. Aye, it is true after all. We did go get Garuda. Even Tiberius knows deep down they'd come for him. They would want to make sure their nightmare really was put down. In a universe so rich for exploring and packed with intelligent life, there's still idiots that would have you think the planet you stood on was as flat as a disc. So even when given the proof, they would not believe it until they felt it and saw it with their own eyes, and some may even double down upon seeing their perceived truth to be a lie, going further down the spiral, of course. Jaal could see the concern truly this time. "Do you fear Eidolon would go down that spiral?" "If there's Anything I've learnt from those that put their faith in a higher power and carry it with violent zealotry? Then yes. Decimus drank from his glass on his desk. Jaal suddenly began working on his chair with a jolt, as if a switch had been flipped and a different setting to his behaviour had changed. Decimus was not in the room for all Jaal's perceptions would allow it, for he was entirely constricted in his operations chair until giving out a report. We approach the system now. Signatures of Eidolon's escort fleet are present. No sign of the pasture of serenity among them, not even a trail. Decimus launched himself on his chair with enough force to throw it flat on the floor. With urgency in his voice, the commandant ordered Jaal, "Radar ping now! Let them know we're coming in. We can see if we can get a response." After working with a keyboard and pressing buttons on his datapad, Jaal responds, "Ping sent. As per safety protocol, decelerating to sublight speed. Ping response may return within 10 minutes. Order on crew alert. Go to Amber. All personnel suited, non-essentials shut off. Combat units prepare for formal greetings. Jaal, you have the bridge. I need to get ready to meet with whoever is in charge. Could you identify?" In short time, Jaal answered, "Grand Apostle Bartholomew, one of the 12, sir, on board his own ship, the Flayer of Fleets." Here's hoping it remains just a name and not a prelude. Proceed to radio contact. On screen. Command deck, Jaal. Decimus placed back on his mask and exited the room, leaving Jaal to oversee the operations of the ship via his throne. Decimus entered the ship's command deck as a distinct siren for combat preparations blared. Bridge staff equipped themselves with holstered pistols and armoured guards stood ready at the doorways. The staff had doubled to over 24 as orders and requests were relayed to the appropriate officers. The commander sat on his command chair and operated the built-in screen to patch through the front screen for the hopeful response to his hailing. Ensign Dagmafor reported to the commander, "Our signal has been received. A channel is being established on screen per your instructions, sir. Connecting to the Flayer of Fleet's bridge now." The energetic commerce of the bridge had been instantaneously put to a halt as the communication channel dominated the front screen in its entirety. All onlookers were both amazed and put back to the sight of a magnificent figure whose very frame dominated the screen. He was quadrupedal, standing at around 25 feet tall, covered entirely in ornate gold and silver-plated armour, underneath covering him a dark brown undersuit, and only his hands, neck and head were exposed, showing bleached white skin and the signature serrated horns of a dinosaur. But this was no Gerahine Lord. Decimus understood this to be the 4th evolutionary stage, a stage below that of the Gerahine. However, in the case of this particular being, had on paper a defective gene that turned into something akin to a centaur, denying him to never be able to evolve into the legendary status, but it had its own special traits for ferocity. On the belt of the being's armour was a dagger designed to remove skin, and in opposition an armoured book with the title, The Truth of Faith, the faithful holy book, its markings carrying the regalia of the Grand Apostle, 12 of the most powerful and devoted generals to Eidolon himself. He spoke with a voice so grand and filled with eminence that the people on the bridge, Decimus included, were vigorously humbled and making restraints to not kneel on the floor. "You should know me as Grand Apostle Bartholomew, 3rd Grand Disciple of Eidolon, the Illuminator in faithful service to Emperor Melitian, blessed above all others. May the ship captain address me, so I may know whom to speak towards." Compelled by a force alien to him, even as he got off his seat, his breathing was calm. It unnerved him in the mind on how physically calm he was. "I am Commander Decimus, captain of this vessel, the Pirate Negotiation. It is an honour to be in conversation with one of his greatest devotees." The captain did well to not address Emperor Melitian, as both his title or name, for it was an offence to do so in the presence of the faithful as a loyalist. Both men saluted one another. It was irrelevant to both ongoings what went on around them in their command decks, for they knew all was on pause to witness the conversation by those present. "It pleases me to not know that you did not retreat in a cowardly fashion. I am to assume that Tiberius has been, hated by all, is still alive on this planet. For what else would you have to return for?" Right to the question. Not a moment to share more niceties. Decimus knew an answer was needed straight away, and without a moment to think, should that rise doubt. It is, your grace. I commissioned Targos, Cometh, and Balthazar, Gerahene lords, to engage him in hopes that they would take him out. However, didn't go according to plan, and I was not aiming to make another mistake, so I took my chances with hiring Garuda. Bartholomew made no attempt at hiding his disgust to the mention of that name. "Him, of all people. Best you simply sat back and let us do the work." The commander saw an opening to reinforce his end of the story, and took it right there and then. He didn't know for sure if he was being grilled for loyalty issues, but for now he had to pick the right answers for the sake of himself and his crew. "It had not become known to me that Balthazar had sent out a message, until we had departed the system in due time. I had enforced radio silence upon the revelation Tiberius was alive to ensure that we could properly disclose this to the correct authorities, like yourself and Eidolon, to avoid civil unrest and fear." Bartholomew laughed. Decimus kept his composure, though. Deep down his boots were quaking, and he could feel his head warming up, almost on the verge of producing sweat, which if spotted would arouse suspicion. Playing the fool, Decimus inquired, "Your grace?" Bartholomew abruptly halted his laughter, giving mental whiplash to the observers on the sudden change of mood. "Commander Decimus, it is foolish to think those of the faith bear any form of fear towards our enemies. For what reason? We, as we both know, are on the path of righteousness. For they are the wrong and we are the right. They the weak and we the might. And by the passing of the stores, permit them to see the light." The old saying of the faithful's founding text. To the loyalist it was utter arrogance. For the faithful, reinforcement of their creed, and the source of their resolve. While Decimus couldn't argue the results, morale of the faithful is higher than anything recorded before. Its roots were rotten to his perception of what he deemed as dishonourable fanaticism. Bartholomew drew his knife and tinkered with it, all the while being coy. "I have been monitoring our little target for some time now, though I too have my orders. Simply watch and wait." "For whom?" Bartholomew laughed solemnly before staring directly to Tiberius, and, with a conniving, brittle voice, he spoke. "He who gets to decide what is to become of you." Before anyone could process the remark, a proximity alarm blared all across the ship and covered the interior in a red warning light. The ship shook left to right, leaving most of the crew hanging on to anything they could grab to stop them from hitting the ground hard. Decimus's heart sank. He believed he was found out. He was ready to reach for his pistol in anticipation of a boarding party teleporting onto the bridge to attack. Such was the engagement for the faithful, as he readied himself when the ship began to stabilize and the siren waned. Nothing happened. He even pointed his pistol outwards to sweep his own bridge, attending those that bumped into their appliances and ensuring everyone was in operating condition. When all was clear to the captain, he looked back to the screen to see an extra square that was connecting to another channel. Above the window was the name of its source, Pasture of Serenity. The dread was almost ready to burst through the surface as Decimus observed outside the gaps of the viewing screen to see the hull of the Illuminator's flagship that had dragged them into a tractor beam and towed his ship towards the planet where Tiberius resided. The ship was immense in scale, at least 10 times the size of the Pyrrhic negotiation, completely overbearing it like a hawk clasping onto a small rabbit. And there he was, in all his holiness. Eidolon, the Illuminator, had appeared on this time. His presence brought everyone on the bridge to their knees. Even the commander gave in and was held in place by the reverence Eidolon projected through his glowing halo behind his bony horned frill. It set a bright, holy light throughout the bridge, engulfing all the artificial lighting. Even though a technological screen, it seeped through a warmth of ambrosia, serenity unfiltered. Decimus had only seen Eidolon once before, and yet somehow after all this time since, he only got more radiant and magnificent, like a star had taken mortal form, if such a grand being could be given a description of mortality. Even Bartholomew bowed his head in reverence. "My Illuminator, you have returned to us."
"You do not disappoint, my disciple. You fulfilled my wishes to the letter, and did not stray to far-off lands."
The eyes of Eidolon turned to meet with Decimus.
"It could not be said for you, Decimus. Why was we not told sooner?"
"My lord," the captain asked himself in his own mind. Did he just say that? Was he compelled? "Lord Eidolon, your holiness, I left for the sole purpose of securing a victory without the needless loss of life. I decided that it was most prudent to bring a more powerful asset to the deal with him. One who would never shy away from this task, but embrace it wholeheartedly." Eidolon's displeasure erupted from his very being like a volcano.
"You chose that dickhead over us! You chose to have him steal glory rightfully belonging to us! And why did you not dedicate to finishing the job, as Balthazar had enlightened me before arriving back to his system?"
This was not anticipated. Not because of the question, but the mentioning of Balthazar for a second time. The reality had sunk in. Balthazar had been informing Eidolon, even after being placed in the infirmary. Luckily, he was not in the present company to know of the meeting that had taken place before, but the context and order that Eidolon received, this information was crucial. For depending on the messenger, there may be a hint of bias and pandering to the needs of the recipient to make them believe one side more than the other, regardless of the truth. "Sir, Balthazar has become delirious after his engagement with the—"
"I care not for Balthazar's condition, for I have a plan for him. Bartholomew, accompany me to the bridge of the Pyrrhic negotiation."
Before Decimus could protest, 2 flashes of light came forth from the space in front of him, and the form of Eidolon appeared in his armour, accompanied by his bannerman Sadouge. The staff of the bridge trembled at the mere majesty, and reports flew into the bridge of faithful militants in the infirmary, accompanied by Bartholomew. "My lord, it is not my intention to throw our lives away so needlessly."
"And that is why you can never be on our level. You do not know when and whom to sacrifice in order to win. You could not have seen so senile as to not think your ship and crew capable of finishing off Tiberius in that state. What was it that stayed your hand? Was it honor? Your petty rules of engagements that stops our true might being unleashed?"
Eidolon reached for the mask of Decimus. The commander recoiled, but it was too late. His true face was revealed to all in the room, and Eidolon addressed him again.
"Or was it your loyalty, Fleet Admiral Alejandro Vasquez of the 35th Aurelian Starfleet, service number NVR 7765?
Now that the visage was off, a weight Vasquez didn't know was there had been lifted. Perhaps the troop had set him free, and he gazed with all his willpower into the blazing eyes of Eidolon, who stood well over 1.5 feet above him. "I did it for the loyalty of my men. Perhaps your teachings have you be desensitized to sacrificing many lives for the sake of one enemy, but I prefer them to see their families again. Empires cannot be sustained by martyrs, Your Excellency. Eidolon lowered his head to be within inches of Vasquez's face, the hot air from his snout and steam from the gaps between his jaws seeping out like smoke from a volcano.
Speaking such heresy can land you in dark places, Vasquez. But I shall absolve you for your transgressions this time, as I did before, when you took up our colours for the first time. That was a historic day for you, wasn't it?
The Illuminator had a smile that carried such arrogance that Vasquez was almost tempted to remind him that pride was a sin too. But he wanted to keep his head for the sake of his men. Then I apologize for my incompetence, but I shall still stand by my decisions as a leader. Do not think ill of my crew for having loyalty to follow me. Think ill of me to not have contacted you over Garuda, Your Grace. Eidolon backed away and spreaded his arms wide openly, and gently lowered them down each side of Vasquez while reciting a prayer.
My Emperor permits me compassion to forgive, compassion to understand, and compassion to move on. You are forgiven, Commander Vasquez. Many lessons learned from these transgressions power your resolve in future endeavours.
As sincere as the message was, Vasquez still couldn't fully trust them, especially since his identity has been publicly revealed to the ship's bridge. Eidolon addressed them.
You shall not speak of his identity, understood?
To which all nodded. The Illuminator knocked down to Decimus.
That's one divine favour of mine. Soon I may wish upon you a debt to be repaid, but for now, accompany me to the infirmary.
Vasquez put on his mask and offered to direct him to the infirmary, though with a wave of his hand. Both vanished with a flash of light to the sheer confusion of the staff. From his own perception, Vasquez had instantaneously teleported to the infirmary, specifically the ward that was created to the monstrous size of a Gerahim Lord. White sterile walls and floors, the most polished area of the ship had fans on the ceiling that slowly sprayed out disinfectant that would sanitize the wards while still being safe to breathe. Eidolon and Sadouj were already making their way to the entrance of Bartholomew's cubicle. The commander caught up to them to see what was going on. Bartholomew stood to the side of Balthazar. Despite being large himself, Balthazar was even more massive by 10 feet. He was attached to life support machinery and kept fed by tubes. Already he had lost a quarter of his muscle mass, and the signs of him making a full recovery was all but diminished. Eidolon folded his arms and asked the Grand Apostle,
Can you save him?
Yes, with certainty I can, but not here. To my sanctum he goes. Eidolon nodded.
And so he shall. You may depart when ready, and do what you must. As for my assailants here,
he turns to face Decimus.
We must discuss our plan on dealing with Tiberius, since you have thrown a wrench in the machine by bringing...
He looked to the side of Decimus to the entrance of the large cubicle.
Him,
said with such ire it almost felt like the ward would become toxic. Though no one was there when Decimus looked to see himself. Decimus cautiously informed Eidolon. It was indeed my operation, and thus my choice to do so as the commander. Eidolon gave a snarl.
Emphasize the was part, boy. From now on, until I deem it, this operation of yours is mine. I decide where, when, and how much we deliver unto that accursed fiend. You are not a fool for allowing him to go on in whatever way he thinks is a life. Don't lie to me. You know his power is based on his mental state. You could very well be setting him up to be able to deal far more damage to us than what he would have initially done had you simply devoted yourself to finishing him off.
His muscles tensed with such contained anger. It had everyone on the ship aside from Garuda trembling. For Garuda, he merely chuckled at the thought on how powerful Eidolon was, and scribbled a note into his diary. Errand number 57. Beat Eidolon's ass after this, he wrote. Eidolon thankfully refrained.
I have had a change of heart. Our council shall be moved to my sanctum, for near is the time that we heal a brother in need.
He looked at Balthazar's still body. One of his eyes opened and widened to the realization of his company. He tried to utter a word, but stopped as Eidolon raised a hand.
Save your strength, my devoted. Your absolution is at hand, and your ascension.
Bartholomew's head jerked to face Eidolon, and he galloped to his side. Are you sure, my liege?
With absolute certainty. Take us to my sanctum first, then for Balthazar in the chamber of ascension, and prepare the ceremony.
And that concludes chapter 12. Stay tuned, for within the next week, chapter 13 shall be published. Thank you for listening.